official welcome. Thanks everybody for joining us on our discussion on successfully leading teams in hybrid work models. As we proceed, just like I said, proceed to submit questions. And then we also have a poll going on right now that we would love for you to fill out, because that will also change the conversation that we have with the panelists. And I'm going to actually be introducing our moderator today, Marla Skibbins. She's the founder of Level Up EQ. She's also a master certified executive coach and a senior faculty member at CTI. For 2 decades, she's been training and providing executive coaching in both corporate and startup venues, coaching both executives and teams. And her 16 years of experience have been working in Silicon Valley with companies internationally, and now focuses on serving executive teams in tech and biotech companies. So I'm going to let her take it from here.
Thank you, Marley. And thank you all for being here. And I wanted to say a little bit about why Level Up EQ. Because what we're about is taking leaders in tech and biotech to the next level of their leadership. But why is that important? Well, when you are moving towards your full potential, and when full potential is realized, humans can create anything. And that is where magic happens. That is where innovation happens. And so this conversation about teams is very important, because that's also where things can break down. And that's in the best of times. And now we are moving to teams in this very mixed environment. And how do we stay productive? How do we stay at the top of our game in that? And I'm very grateful to our panelists that are going to be here to share their wisdom, their bumps along the way, and best advice for how do we lead teams in a hybrid environment. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And Craig, why don't we start with you? So please introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Marla, and thanks everyone for this opportunity. So my name is Craig Lichtenstein. I am currently the Vice President of Manufacturing and Supply Chain at a startup biotech in cell and gene therapy known as Sana Biotechnology. I've spent about 20 years in the industry across a variety of roles in both large and small companies, focused on mostly operations and supply chain, and I'm delighted to be part of this panel today.
Great, thank you. Jody.
Hi, my name is Jody Mcdermott. I'm the Chief Product Officer for a company called Dude Solutions. We're a private equity-owned firm that works in the SaaS software space for operations management. We have employees all over the globe, and excited to be here today to talk a little bit about how we're managing this topic.
Thank you, Jody. Chris, you're on.
Hey, my name is Chris. I have been at Box, which is a cloud content service provider, for about 7 years at this point. Spent almost my entire career primarily in corporate finance, but have done a handful of sort of finance business partnering roles, and I manage our investor relations function at this point as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, panelists, and actually audience. Let's all do this. The panelists will get to say this out loud. Audience, chat this if you feel comfortable doing it. So I'm going to ask you an icebreaker question. And why I'm doing that is part of what we have to do in this more hybrid, remote working environment with teams is to create more psychological safety. And we do that through revealing who we are as human beings. So here's your icebreaker question. Where in your life in the last month have you been brave? And you can just give a 1 or 2 sentence about where in your life have you been brave. And Jody, you're on.
My goodness. You know, I think bravery happens every day in dealing with difficult issues that come up at work. And you can't run away from them. You have to tackle them, and you have to approach them. And some days you're going to win them, and some days you're not. But bravery is putting yourself out there. And I think as you kind of teed it up, showing yourself a little bit more and more personally, and opening up to tell employees who you are, so that they can build trust with you, and they can also let down their guard, because a lot of people have been a range of emotions, and there's moments that I've had my range of emotions through COVID and being at home, and so those have been more the moments for me.
That's great. Thank you for that. Chris.
I'm going to go with a non-work answer here, and I don't even know if this counts as being brave, but I have found that the sort of range of emotions that I deal with at home with my kids has been a lot crazier than the range of emotions that I've dealt with people at work. My family moved within the Bay Area, but like 30 miles away in the middle of COVID. And so my kids kind of got uprooted from their school, and we thought it was going to make it an easier transition because they weren't going to school anyway. At the end of the day, it made it a much harder transition. And so the kinds of conversations we've had to have with them about, not having interactions with friends, not being able to meet people, have been sort of a lot more challenging than we thought they would be. And so just as parents, my wife and I have had to have, I think, a lot more challenging conversations than we expected this year.
Great. Thank you for that. Craig.
Last but not least, right? So I think I like Chris probably have a couple home examples, but I'll try to lean into a work-related example. So I've had some lately, and I think this will come up across the panel today. There's been a lot of challenging conversations happening at work, and I think people are in a variety of emotional states, and I've had to lean into some real difficult work-related conversations as it relates to some employee performance and how they're showing up emotionally and how it's impacting the broader team and the positions they're in. So it's been challenging to really want to lean into those conversations, especially in a virtual environment. But I think it's the right thing to do, and to really tackle those up front and really dig into those crucial conversations at those times.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you, audience, for sharing your responses as well. So I want to say a few things. One, panelists, be off mute, because this is going to be a casual conversation where you're welcome to jump in when you have something to say. This is really casual and organic. And we're also going to be bouncing off the audience. So audience, again, please fill out your poll if you haven't. Please ask your questions if you haven't. And please upvote questions if you find something you really want to have answered. Put a like next to it so that we know you want to know that answer.
Hey, Marla.
So, yeah.
I'll stay off mute for now, but I have some construction going on.
I saw that.
So if there's like people going up on the ladder and you guys can all like hear folks stomping around on the roof,
right,
let me know. And
we will.
Thanks for keeping it real there, Chris.
But this is what it is, right? The more we're going to have workers in different places, we have to be responsible for our impact. And thank you, Chris, for being responsible. Let me know if it's too loud. And we are real people in a world that, we can't always manage perfectly. And I think that's one of the benefits and beauties of what has happened in COVID, is that we're becoming more real with each other. So let's dive in and start with our first question, which is, describe what your work environment looked like pre-COVID for your organization and to what it looks like today.
I'll jump in.
Yeah, go.
So we're primarily a North American-based company. And one of the policies that we had rolled out pre-COVID was a work from anywhere policy, whereby doesn't necessarily mean that you're automatically remote, but for me, I live in Northern Virginia and my parents live in Northern California. So if I want to go out for a week and visit my family and I want to work 4 days and take 1 day off, I can just work out there. Doesn't mean I don't ever go into the office again, but it means I have that flexibility to spend time with family, et cetera. Post-COVID and through COVID, we did 2 international acquisitions, which we were integrating during this lockdown work from home period of time. And I think what we saw was that we were able to really, in some ways, the playing field got really leveled across the board because everybody got on Zoom, people had their video on. We really asked everyone to put their video on. And although it was hard because you couldn't pick up and travel to go visit people in person, we just really we got to know people over Zoom. That was all you had to offer. And so Now we are, we're still a work from anywhere, but we are trying to figure out how do we also get those collaboration opportunities to come back into the office. And for us, we're working through that now, and there's no recipe for this. I don't think anybody's been through anything like this before. There's just no recipe for it. So I'm sure that'll get addressed in some of your subsequent questions, but we at least had the advantage of having that work from anywhere policy already established, which helped made it a lot smoother through the transition.
That's great. How about you, Craig?
Yeah, so we're a science-based organization. So we definitely pre-COVID did not have a work for anywhere environment. We were unique, even though we are a startup. We do have 3 offices throughout North America or throughout United States, two in the West Coast and one in the East Coast. And so everyone was located in one of those 3 offices, and that was the kind of the primary expectation. A lot of with the hands-on work, and then of course when we faced COVID, immediately everyone dispersed and the office is shut down. And one of I would say the company's more challenging decisions from day one was whether to shut the offices down entirely or to, leave the essential staff on site to perform the experiments that were many months in the making. And if they were to be stopped, that could set the organization back quite substantially. And so, there was a lot of thinking that went into that conversation. And a very good, I think, example that the company started with is kind of prioritizing what was crucial, and safety, personal safety being number one, employee safety, then public health, and then finally business continuity. And with that lens, the decision was taken to keep the offices open for the essential workers who needed to perform the experiments. But everyone else, like myself, who's more of an office-based employee, was kind of sent home and not only not expected, but discouraged from going back in to put at risk the folks that needed to be there. And so that's kind of the pre-COVID environment, and during COVID, that's kind of been the way that we've operated. We are slowly eking back into what the new normal is for our organization, but for the most part, it's been working remote outside of the folks that need to be there to perform the on-site experiments.
Great. And Chris, what about you?
Yeah, I would say that pre-COVID, we were generally speaking flexible, but with primarily an emphasis on being in the office. Our CEO is kind of wants people there, wants kind of a startup-y almost kind of feel to the company. And so while, everybody's had the flexibility pre-COVID to, I need to go visit my family out of state or something like that, so I'm going to be remote for about a week. For the most part, when people are we hire in the areas that are very close to our offices, and the expectation is that, if you're at home, you're actually going to be in the office. And our leadership team has generally tried to sort of create sort of a gravity around the offices, even though people had the flexibility. We went 100% remote full-time, I think, back in mid-March of last year. So very sort of different environment for us. But one of the things that Jody mentioned was having a level playing field. And I think that's actually helped to sort of transition what, our environment felt like before in the office into a fully remote sort of situation where everybody suddenly one day was on Zoom, and we already had all the tools rolled out and stuff like that. So it was a relatively easy transition for us to make, purely from a, how do people meet kind of perspective. Obviously, there's different cultural things and stuff that comes up along the way. But yeah, we kind of moved very quickly and very easily into everybody's remote, just hop on Zoom kind of environment.
That's great. That's great. So Marley, I want to check in with you for the poll. What do we have that you might share?
Our first polling question was actually about what kind of working environment our folks are in right now. And it looks like it's almost a pretty even split, half and half, between being a blended environment and being back to a traditional 9-to-5. So that's kind of an interesting shift to see, considering that we're hearing a little bit about the remote work that you guys are doing, and then the anytime, anywhere look. But it looks like a vast majority of our folks are actually blended right now, and then having another half in a traditional 9-to-5 office.
Yeah, that's interesting. And there's a whole other, conversation about those folks that are going back to the traditional, and then how do we balance what it was like in that more free state, and how are we going to address you can see the feelings that will come up in relationship to that. And I think engagement is really affected by autonomy and freedom. And that is a freedom that got taken away. So that's really interesting. So here's another question for the panelists. How have you, the changes that you've experienced during this whole time, including completely remote and then possibly your move to the next thing, affected productivity and collaboration and culture within your teams?
I guess I can jump in. I mean, I think it's been a very much a roller coaster through this entire experience. I mean, I think from the beginning, of course, there was the adjustment to what it was working remotely look like, and similar to Chris and Jody. I mean, we had elements of interacting with multiple offices, so people were used to the virtual platform. So there was the easy migration to using Zoom on a more consistent basis, and I think there was a slow uptick. My experience was it went very quickly to a kind of the pendulum swung in a very, let's say, unsustainable solution where people were just kind of working nonstop. Lunch became no longer an option, right? There was no such thing as a 12 lunch break. And one of the things that we had always prided ourselves on as an organization is taking a pause, having that organic time to have lunch together and sit down in the break room, and that went away, right? Everyone was just expected to work through, and there were very limited breaking periods, and all to the point where at one point, or we still do, have introduced no meeting blocks on people's calendars because there was just no way for people to carve out thinking space. Yeah. It was just constant meeting after meeting. It just became very hard to recall what it was like to actually have a break, or to have those water cooler conversations, because everyone was running from one meeting to the next, and any white space on people's calendar was just consumed with the next meeting. So that was a little bit of a back and forth. And now that we're continuing to adjust to this new normal and trying, and with some people being in the office and some people not, is, okay, how do we get to a more sustainable solution of productivity, interaction, dialogue, collective space, all the things that we miss and value in terms of having some organizational dynamics. So it's been a very much of a roller coaster, and I think we're looking forward to figuring out what that new normal is and making that something that's sustainable into the future.
That's great.
I would agree with that. I think we instituted No Meeting Fridays, and the invitation came from our CEO onto everybody's calendar to block it.
That's great.
And so it's there right now. Do meetings still happen on Friday? Yes, but they tend to be more one-on-one conversations and things like that than your big, hey, team function meetings. We really try to steer clear of that. But I think over the course of the year, it ebbed and flowed, right? For people who had kids at home or were at home and didn't have a pet or a spouse or a roommate or somebody to even just have dialogue with, or a furry head to be able to like pet during the day. And I can't tell you how comforting it's been for me to have our dog at home. It was really hard. And so some employees sort of thrived in, oh my gosh, I'm an introvert and I love working from home, and this is awesome. This is so great. And other people who just really craved, wow, I'm missing people in person. I miss hugging a colleague. And just that roller coaster and all the things that you've had to work through that. Yeah. And so it does change the fabric of a company. I think that, across the board, a lot of companies have seen attrition as we started to come out, because people are just sort of pent up and something has to change in their lives. They've been locked in four walls. And, it's been hard for people. And, what does the new normal look like? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Is it the CDC guidelines? Is it your company's guidelines? What are the new expectations? Do I ever have to come in the office ever again?
Right. And also what you're saying is, and what's my new normal? Because with that pent up, it's like, is there a new normal I need to create for myself, a new company, a new, opportunity? That's very interesting. And for both of you, and then Chris will get your thoughts on this, the emotional piece of this has got to take a hit to both the collaboration and or the functionality or productivity. I mean, that's kind of like a duh, but yet this has been just such a tumultuous time, and it's going to continue. It's not like, oh, yay, now it's over. It's going to continue to be tumultuous. And how do we help people navigate and continue to be productive and collaborative, and even more so in, now that we're going into something that is hopefully more normal. Chris, what about you? What would you say the effects have been to productivity and collaboration and culture within your team?
Yeah, I would kind of echo what Craig said. I mean, use the word roller coaster. It's kind of been the best way to describe it. So lots of ups and downs and twists and turns, I think. And what's been a little bit interesting is to see how it's, especially, I mean, like the productivity piece, I feel like for quite a while was very, very high, not necessarily for good reasons, but because it became so much harder to blur the lines between when you're on work and when you're off work, and people's like, just the number of hours that people were putting into things.
The burnout.
Yeah, went kind of off the charts for a while, which led to, you know, probably around November, December timeframe in particular, especially as I think that was the time when people were realizing, okay, I might not see my family at the holidays this year and so on and so forth. That was the time when I started seeing and having much harder conversations with a couple of people on my team in particular who it was hitting really, really hard. So on the one sense, you have really high productivity, but it's leading to sort of like a set of negative impacts on the culture side as well. On the other hand, there were like certain cultural benefits that I felt like were coming out of it. I felt like I started to get to know some of my teammates a lot better in some ways than I did before, because I would have very quick snippets of conversations with their spouses who might be in the background or something like that. And their dogs would be in the Zoom meetings, and they'd be holding their kids and feeding their babies for a meeting, you know, every once in a while. So you start to interact with the other parts of people's lives a whole lot more frequently. And, you know, it's not like big things, but just like those little snippets and stuff like that end up, you know, start building in a little bit. And I felt like I started to actually get to know my teammates a lot better in some senses, seeing them, you know, in their natural habitats, I guess, in ways that you don't see if you have, you know, a culture that is kind of focused on being in the office more.
Yeah.
So
I want to underline that. That is so important what you're saying, Chris, because that is, if psychological safety is the magic that is a team, if we can have a psychologically safe space, which means vulnerability. You see my kids, you see my dog, you talk to my partner, you see my messy possibly area back there. Oops, I forgot to blur my screen. Whatever it is, they become human beings, and they're no longer this object of this person in a team that has this particular front on. They become more real, and we can connect to them more. And we were very much, I think, pre-COVID trying to have a persona, some of us, and this has broken down the persona, and likewise I think can create very resourceful teams, because like you're saying, there's a benefit. We get to see the human being, and now I can be a human being. I can risk, I can dare more, because I'm surrounded by other human beings that struggle just like I do, have elation just like I do. I can trust them more. So I love your pointing out that the upside of that. So I'm curious, Marla, I know we have a couple of poll questions that'll pertain to what we're talking about. What do you have there for us?
One of our questions was actually if there was a different perception for productivity from traditional office to remote, and overwhelmingly 82% of people say yes. So there is some agreement there that the productivity has changed. But one of the other things that we asked is if folks think that their company has a plan in place to address hybrid team communication types. And there's actually a pretty interesting split there, where we have about 41% of folks saying yes, but then 32 saying no, and 27 saying unsure. So it looks like there's a little bit of a disconnect there, whether or not they think the company has a plan in place to address that. We also got a question that I think kind of segues into our next piece, but also addresses this from one of our viewers that is pretty much open to anybody. But the question is, how are you thinking about the role of the frontline manager and how they need to change how they accomplish their roles, such as the leading and managing and the doing?
Who wants to take that?
Well, I don't think it's any different from, I guess, pre and post COVID. I think there's a piece of that of enabling managers and making sure that people have management training on frontline managers for how they're holding their teams accountable. I mean, this kind of goes back to the productivity piece. I've been working with people that are remote or people that are sitting, right down the hallway from me for years. And people that are remote can be just as productive as long as they show up. You feel their presence, the work that they're doing, and they're communicating, right? And there's people that come into an office that you may not feel their presence at all. And so I don't think I think the question can transcend above just the working environment, although I'm sure it does present more challenges, right? Because you need to, in some ways, encourage people, look, you got to show up, you got to have your video on, people need to feel your presence. And that piece of it, I think, is maybe teaching managers and making sure that they understand, look, you have to hold your team accountable. You got to make sure that people are continuing to engage. Some people may be less likely to state a point, raise an opinion if they're on a Zoom call versus if they're sitting around a conference room table. So maybe drawing out some of those human behaviors that aren't as natural through a video screen as they would be in person.
Either of you want to add to that?
I mean, the only thing I think that Jody highlights is the video is an interesting dynamic because it does I've seen plenty of opportunity where it's so much easier to tune out and it's so much easier to be a bystander. And I think
or to multitask.
Or yeah, exactly. Great examples, right? Even, I'm sure we all are guilty of doing that, where it's like, yeah, I'm paying attention to what you're saying, and no, don't worry, I'm not on another object. But it's that much harder, right, to be present on the video than it is. So it kind of raises the bar and the expectation of what people need to do especially if they're a frontline leader or any manager, that really to kind of be a very active and engaged part of the conversation. So I think it's kind of setting that expectation up front and setting the right example of what it means to participate and be present in the moment. And so I think engagement is definitely a lot more challenging in this virtual environment, even though we've all talked about the abundance of meetings and the productivity. It's just we're so distracted by so many different elements of it, whether it's on the screen, whether it's what's surrounding us, the work that's going on at the home, that it's just really being present and focus is so much harder in this environment than I think ever before.
Yeah. I'm curious. So what if you were going to give your best practice tips? And for instance, I'll give you a for instance. In our team for Level Up EQ, in every meeting, we have everybody check in really brief on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 you're totally amazing, 1 you're not at all, and 1 or 2 words that describe that. So that people have to be in the room. They have to, at least for that moment, they show up and are present and are sharing. And you get a read of the room where you're missing all of the physical. We have so much that we're missing when we don't see people in a room together, all the body language and who knows what else that our brain catches that we can't even be aware of. So do you have little best practices for helping people be present, helping people be in the room, or things that you do to keep people present in meetings so that you don't lose them? Because I bet people would love to hear that, because this is going to be, Zoom's not going away. And more importantly, it's when we have 3 people in a conference room, 2 people in another conference room, both on Zoom, and then 3 people in a conference room. How do we manage that? So
we do icebreakers, and we started doing them actually pre-COVID. Our leadership team would come together, and we realized we were jumping straight into the business content and strategy really fast. And to build trust, you have to share things about yourself. It doesn't have to be things you wouldn't want to tell people, but just sharing to open up so people learn. It's that vulnerability window, right, that builds trust. So we do very simple things out of those card decks. You can buy them in stores and stuff like that, of simple things like what was your favorite family holiday growing up? I think last week's question was, if you had a boat, what would you name it? And it was crazy. Some of them are crazy questions, but they spark conversation and they spark getting people to just spend a few minutes not talking about work. And some of them are more effective than others, but that's one method that we've used. But I like the check-in too. We do that sometimes as well. 2 words about how you're feeling today.
That's great. What about you, Chris?
This is probably an area where I have more to learn than contribute. on my team specifically, I do make a very concerted effort that every week we're having conversations that are definitely kind of more personal, checking in, what's going on in your life, what have you been doing, sort of thing. I think when, more broadly thinking about meetings at Box in the sort of Zoom era, there's not really a clear way that people approach getting folks focused. And to be candid, I have to admit that like there are plenty of meetings where I'm only like half checked into the meeting, and part of that has been, like a behavior I think is not unreasonable, because the number of meetings you get pulled into now seems to have proliferated, and I know that I'm not required in each of them. And so what I try and do is find the right balance between how do I participate versus how do I not let my calendar become like just completely overwhelmed by meetings. And I know that like the people on my team are having those same sort of internal debates as well. And so I try not to like discourage, a little bit of judiciousness with their attention, given the number of meetings that I know they get pulled into. But it's probably an area where I haven't really necessarily found the right balance at this point.
Yeah, that's great. Craig, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, what Marla, what you and Jody said, those are all, I would say that those are the best practices I've come across, where it's more programmatic, or plan and say, we're going to start every meeting by checking in, or we're going to start every encouraging and almost requiring everyone speak up at the beginning of the meeting. So you get the kind of the creative juices and the engagement started. I think the thing that I do more often informally these days is really allocating at least a few minutes up front just to kind of have more personal conversations. How was the weekend? Just anything, just to, sometimes they can seem not very productive, but just to at least start the dialogue, whether it's on a one-on-one basis or whether it's more across a broader team. But I think just getting people speaking and engaged, and again, present and consumed by the meeting, relative to wherever the headspace were before that meeting is an important way to just start the dialogue and hopefully have that continuity of that participation.
One tip that I would add.
Yeah, Jody, go.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to ask for both of you, since it seems to be a common practice. Is that standard for no matter what the meeting is about, or is this something?
No.
Okay.
I think it's more like, especially when you have your big group meetings, right?
Yeah.
And the one thing that I would add to that is that for big group session meetings, like we had one today, our product and engineering leadership team comes together every Wednesday for an hour, and we are rotating who's the facilitator and who's the scribe. And it's forcing every single person, regardless of who you are or your role, to take a turn facilitating, because it forces those people who are less likely to stand up and lead to do that, or to show their voice, not that they don't lead, but to show their voice and to lead that group. It gives them great exposure, and it gets everybody participating. And I think it's increased our overall dialogue for our team. Like everybody has like leveled up to a more even contribution level just by having that facilitator scribe role and rotating it every week.
Yeah, they're on the edge of their chair going, oh God, I'm going to have to do this next week. Let me watch what they're doing. Well, I love this. And I know we have to go back on script to the questions and the poll, but one of the things that you are sparking in me, because we do a great job, it sounds like, of getting people there at the beginning. And I want to just share a best practice of one of my clients in their smaller team meetings, and then something they do in their larger team meetings. So in the smaller team meetings, they have a bell that goes off during the meeting, like a meditation bell, and there are apps. Insight Timer is one of them that you can set, and that it is discussed. The context of this bell is when you hear that bell, you need to look into the camera and take a few present breaths and be in the conversation. So there's a reminding, oh yeah, if I was off because I heard a ping and now I'm over on this monitor, oh no, I'm coming back to this meeting.
What's the name of that again?
The name of the timer is Insight. Chat that Insight Timer. Marley, do you know the Insight Timer?
Insight Timer.
Insight Timer.
I gotta check that out.
It's an app on any iPhone and on Android, and it rings, I'd ring it for you, but I'm not going to go multitask to get it open. So that's one thing. And in a larger, and even sometimes when we've done retreats with them, we ring that bell and everybody has to say what's a one-word description of where you are about the topic right now. And everybody is expected to, say their one word. So it's a read of the room, and they know that bell's going to go off. So they need to be there through the meeting. In a larger setting, you chat it. And the chats, people are checking in on the chat. Oh, great. Thanks, Craig, for that answer. I hear, you're for it, or you're neutral to this or whatever, so that, you might be called on. Because when we're personally, socially in a room, we're less like, though people still go off on their computers. I hear often my clients talk about that. But it's less socially okay. So it's just such a suck, because there's so much. I mean, we have I'm looking at my screen, and I don't know about you, there are a lot of things open, and they're an attention grab. So we have to be grabbing as leaders. We have to become facilitators of people's attention in the environment. So thank you for that little detour, because I want to have people start to be thinking about what are the best practices within our teams to bring them present. So what would you say are some of, or maybe a crucial, if you don't have a bunch, but you want to share one, challenge your team faces in this hybrid environment? And beyond this attention piece, are there workflows, or is there the creativity that's missing? So what are the challenges in this hybrid environment, and how are you working to overcome them? Chris, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two most challenging situations I had, both related to people directly on my team. One was somebody who would not stop working, but I could tell it was just like grinding him down, but like he wouldn't actually stop working. And that one, like, it took multiple conversations. Like, you actually have to take some time off. You have to step away from your computer. Like, you can't, like, I could see, and this is, I mentioned earlier, in the November, December timeframe is when it really started to kind of wear down on people. And I had to just be like extremely blunt at the end of the day with the person, and make sure they understood that, like, I really truly did not want them working. And it took multiple attempts to get them to log off and get away from their computer. That was one. And I think, like, part of what I needed to do for this person as well was, like, actually model the behavior, like, get away from my computer as well, like, prove to them, like, look, holidays are coming up. You need to actually take some of this time off work, even if you're not traveling anywhere. You're not going to get to go see your family in Minnesota. I know that's a huge bummer, but you actually can't just sit here and work all day. So part of helping him to sort of get to that point was making sure he knew that that's what I was actually going to be doing as well during that time, even though I also wasn't traveling. So that was one. The other one was actually just relatively recently. It was only 3 weeks ago that I made my first new hire in the sort of like remote COVID era. I have a relatively small team, and actually it's been very stable over the course of the past year or so. But brought somebody in just a couple of weeks ago, and what was really difficult there was to figure out how to, like, build in the time for that person to make the social connections and get to know people better. It's really easy when you're in the office and a new person shows up and it's like, hey, the 4 of us are going down to grab lunch at this point. Why don't you come with us? None of that existed. So I had to be very sort of proactive in putting together a schedule and a list of people to make sure he was meeting with. And, like, yeah, I know you don't have anything to talk about from a work-related perspective, but, like, this is not meant to be a tactical meeting. You need to, like, get to know this person. And so really emphasizing on the people who are currently on the team that they needed to make sure that they were spending that time. You don't need to be talking about work. In fact, it might even be better if it doesn't come up at all, but just get to know this person. Right. And to cast a relatively wide net for doing that too, like, not just the people who are directly on the team, but also you're going to have these 3 or 4 partners in these 2 different organizations, and making sure they got on, like, not got on their cases, but strongly encourage the people who are not even directly on my team, but who someday might have a reason to interact with this person, to start getting to know them ahead of time. So so far so good on that front, although it was my first time having to do it.
Yeah, that's so great. Yeah, the onboarding of people that won't be in an office, and how do we enculturate them when culture is held so often within a building and it's decorating and it's human beings and so forth. Yeah. How about for you?
Yeah.
Jody?
Oh,
Craig,
sorry,
go.
Jody.
No,
No,
go
I
ahead.
was gonna, I mean, certainly I would say, well, a couple challenges I would say in this entire experience. So one, I think if to the question of the hybrid environment, I think the word that comes to mind is cohesion, right? Building that cohesive and engaged team has been really hard, right? It's been really hard to maintain that. I mean, we very much thrive in a place where we can all come together in the same location and have a conversation and just get to know each other a little bit better, feel that point of connection, and then the cohesion and the ability to kind of march forward together as an organization or as a smaller team. And that's been really hard. I will say my team meetings just don't have the same level of product. They don't feel as productive. Yes, the work, as we've said, will continue to get done, and there will be some level of output, but the kind of the building of that team dynamic and that, building that high performing team that we all want to be a part of, that's really hard to do, right? It's really, I found it quite challenging, whether it be looking for feedback, whether it be looking for collaboration, but I found there's just, that's been a really hard thing. And I think in particular, I feel like the temperature has just risen dramatically. I think everyone I've seen and witnessed, and I've had to be reminded by a lot of people, just witness a lot of behavior that I just hadn't seen over the past decade for people that I've worked with. We're just in such an unusual period of time, and there are so many externalities that all of us are facing, and it's sometimes hard to anticipate, but what it's created, and I just think it's just this built up just anxiety, whatever the different levels are, it's just it's just really showed up, at least in my environment, with a couple of different behaviors and episodes where people have just acted out. I've had, of my team, which similar to Chris is relatively small, I've had a couple leaves that people have just had to take for mental health that just out of nowhere. I was like, they're like just acting out, and it was totally needed and warranted, but I just didn't anticipate it. And it just showed us up as it comes back to this point around maintaining this cohesion and really positive environment has been really, really hard to do in this situation.
I think one of the biggest challenges.
I had a problem where I wanted somebody to take a leave for mental health, even just for a couple of weeks to reset, and I couldn't get them to take more than a couple of days off at a time. So how would you guys approach that?
Shut off their password, right? No, I'm kidding. You want to almost.
I actually thought of contacting IT and seeing if they could lock him out of his computer for a little bit. Yeah. But didn't end up.
That would be stress inducing.
Yeah.
I think the biggest issue has been fun. How do you create fun? Because we, I work at a company with a funny name, which is changing this year, but we pride ourselves on having fun, and we create a lot of fun around our brand and the people and the activities that we would normally do in the office, and just having fun. And it's been hard to have fun this year. And so, we've tried to create it through, we did a happy hour on May the 4th be with you, and everybody had Star Wars backgrounds and fun stuff like that. But it's not the same, right? Has anybody been to a Zoom cocktail party? I mean, come on, it's just, it's not the same. And so as we're starting to think about reopening and opening up the office, it's okay, how do we as leaders create a fun environment that people want to come back in, because it's a fun place to be. Yeah. Right. You want to enjoy doing your work. Sometimes work's hard. Tactically, it's hard, but you're with people you enjoy being with, and you go to have fun, right? Yeah. If you're going to spend that much time with people, you want to have fun.
It's so hard to celebrate, right? I mean, so similar to what you said, Jody, our leader it's really stuck in my mind, and I don't know how to fix the problem, but he's basically said COVID makes everything less fun. Right. And so we had some big accomplishments as an organization this year. And instead of coming together as a company and celebrating and doing, whether it's karaoke or whatever the fun element might be, your favorite,
exactly,
basically got on and did a Zoom cocktail. Right. And it's back to this point around distraction focus. I mean, I'll tell you, I participated for 15 minutes. I'm I'm out of here. I've got so many other things to do. And so it's we want to figure. I'm always one that really encourages people to lean into those opportunities to have fun, but it's really hard as a leader to be authentic about it because it's not fun, right? It's just
yeah. There's moments you're like, I'm not having fun,
yeah.
and I'm
It's
supposed to pretend
fun.
that I'm having fun in front of you.
Yeah.
But I think it's changing now, though, right? I mean, we're now getting to that tipping point that we're all starting to plan. At least we are, for what does the new work look like and coming back to work, and so we're getting out of having to create the virtual fun and hopefully moving forward into creating something that extends into the office.
And there will be those teams that it will never go back to the office. It will be and so there's a couple of things I want to underline, and I want to make sure we get to our last question and the poll questions. But it feels like you're really having, and I think this is a good thing, even when you go back to whatever is your normal, is you're having to be much more focused. I think of it as the how and the what. How is how we engage. That's that high performance, what you were talking about, cohesion, Craig, how we are as a team versus what we're getting done together. And I think you've all had to be more focused on that how we are together. How are people doing? How's this person going to not burn out? You're very much in the relationship, and you're having to be facilitators, meaning facilitating that connection, as opposed to, oh, we're just getting the work done as leaders. I think we always had to be focused on that, but it feels like you've all had to really be much more focused on that. And how do we facilitate fun? I love that you said that. It's so true. COVID makes everything less fun. So let's go to the poll for our question. I know we have a couple of different poll responses to the challenges teams face. So what did it say?
So kind of going back to the way that this question began, one of our questions was about communicating and contributing remote versus conference room, like doing that hybrid piece, and whether or not everybody contributes equally. And almost over half of the folks actually said that they were unsure if it's equal. There is actually a little bit of confusion about whether or not there is equal contribution between the folks that are remote and the folks that are actually live in the conference room. And then one of the questions we actually presented, I think because we wanted to touch more on the challenges as far as hiring and advancement opportunities, is whether or not remote colleagues received the same opportunities as in-person colleagues for advancement. And that one was overwhelmingly 80% unsure.
Yeah.
Whether or not that was equal.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting concept to think about, just because you wouldn't consider being remote or in person being the determiner of whether or not that, I mean, it's a performance thing, but everybody is unsure whether or not it affects your advancement.
Well, what affects performance? I mean, that's the question. And what affects, my leader seeing me as performing? And is it time in FaceTime? What is it that it is? I think that's a great call out. Because I think people are unclear. And, Google did a study a while ago where one of the pieces that had teams feel productive is that not in any one meeting, but if we think about a stretch of time that a team is together, that everybody shares relatively equally. And so if that is a question, and that is a part of cohesion and team effectiveness, we got to get that one handled, right? Because if that's a question, people are wondering, well, who's sharing? And it's the person that's, biggest and brightest on the screen when someone else, the lights are dark, or they're in a conference room way far away. You can't really tell, are they participating or not? That's a question. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. So I'm gonna ask you three then, for organizations that are struggling with effectively managing teams in a blended environment, what would you say? What's your advice? Like, if you were going to say, if someone sat down in your office and said, "Oh my God, what do I do?" What would be your parting advice?
So I've worked in a blended environment for a long time, and I myself am a blended employee. Pre-COVID, I was on a plane every Monday morning, and then I worked remotely Thursday, Friday when I was home. And I'm a big believer that you have people need to feel your presence, they need to feel your influence, and they need to see your work. And that work may be output via, culmination of presentations or business objectives that you are, assigned in your role or that you're responsible for, but that work and that output is seen and is it's contributed. People can see that contribution. Mm-hmm. So, I believe that regardless of whether you're remote or you're in the office, it's about making sure that your frontline managers, all the way up through those who are managing people, know how to set goals for their team, hold their team accountable. For the individual knows what's expected from them, whether it be their job description and then the projects that they're assigned and the business outcomes that they are held accountable to driving, and that there's a regular conversation. We've moved to quarterly conversations, not annual reviews, in a way to make sure that dialogue is ongoing with employees between their leader. But you have to make sure that your frontline managers, especially those who are new managers who may have remote employees and they've never managed before, you got to make sure that they're coached and they know how to set those goals, those outcomes and objectives, and then hold the team accountable.
That's great.
Hold each individual accountable for their contribution.
That's great. Craig.
I guess similar to, Jody's point is very valid in terms of, and we talked about this before about the presence and the engagement. I think it starts with that. And to me, it's really the other word that comes to mind is being very purposeful about this, right? I think it's being very clear and upfront and setting expectations and saying, yes, we recognize people are sitting in different environments or in different locations, but these are the kind of how we want the organization to show up. This is how we want individuals to show up. These are our values. I think in our organization from day one, even though we're only a couple of years old, we've established what does it look like to be an employee of our organization, or what are our 3 values, which are very much around thriving as a team, leading from every seat, and making it happen. And I think whether it's remote or whatever it is, if you have those set of core principles or guidelines and you're very purposeful about what the expectations for the team is, I think you'll continue to be able to kind of thrive and be successful. But you always have to be grounded by something, and you have to be very clear up front of what that looks like. So I think no matter the environment, it's very important that you kind of set those expectations up front and really encourage people to live up to those foundations and those values, and therefore talk through that at the end of the day in terms of people's performance. And it's not just about the what, but the how.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For me, I would say I'm far more worried about what's going to happen over the course of the next year than I was at the point when we all went remote. Because again, going back to what Jody said earlier, everybody has been on a level playing field for me for the last 14 months or something like that. And while, it's certainly been a roller coaster and has had challenges, those are, at least everybody's playing with the same set of cards, right? I'm actually very concerned about what's going to happen when we're sort of hybrid and you have some people who are in the office and some people who are remote, because I feel like that's just going to be a much more difficult thing culturally to figure out how to navigate. So I don't have any answers on that yet, but my plan heading into it, I really like what Craig talked about, which is leaning on the culture that exists in the company and making sure you're paying attention to that. The other things I'm planning on doing is, one is, trying to take the same sort of high degree of flexibility approach that I've had over the course of the past 14 months, where, you learn something about how your team meetings are going in a remote world, and you have to change something about them. You need more meetings, you need fewer meetings. The nature of your Slack channel that you use at work just needs to actually change, and it's no longer about work. It's about all the random crazy things that are going on outside of work. You've got to find a different way to, talk about your tasks and that sort of thing. Same thing when everybody's going to go hybrid. All that stuff might need to change again. So the way we run the team meetings might need to be different. We might need more meetings. We might need fewer meetings. I'm going to try and maintain as much flexibility as I can there. The other thing is just making sure that I have a hyper awareness of what's going on the screen, right? If I'm in a conference room and I've got 3 people there, but there are 2 people who are on the screen, making sure that you don't just start looking around the table, and like even the way you're positioned and the way you're sitting, right? If you're in a conference room with a round table,
Mhm.
the 4 people are not looking at each other, but instead the 4 people are looking up at the screen, making sure that, you know, you're staying hyper aware of the people who might not be in the room, because I think those at Box, those are the people who are going to be at sort of a cultural, you know, or a presence related disadvantage. I want to make sure that, you know, you don't
Hey,
slide
Chris, we actually have everybody just keep their computer open, just like we're talking right now. Because when I'd be remote Thursday and Friday, or some weeks that I didn't, you know, fly down to Raleigh, I'd be the one up on the huge Zoom screen and everybody who else was at the conference table. And I'm like, can you guys just flip on your cameras? Then I can see your
Yeah.
face when you're talking. And we made it a standard thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
we've
so great.
talked about that potentially being being a thing where, like, you know, if anybody is remote, everybody has to take the meeting from their desk on Zoom or something like that. And that's one potential solution that might exist. You know, it's going to be the sort of thing that I don't know, as an organization, as like broader from a company perspective, we haven't set those rules or those guidelines out there yet. So we don't even know if it's going to be sort of a hybrid environment where, hey, you're expected to come to work 3 days, but home 2 days, and we're going to try and make it the same 3 days, or you can pick whichever 3 days you want. We don't have any of those policies really set into place right now. We're trying to figure them all out. So once we get sort of the like corporate line drawn in the sand, that's when I'll have to go in and figure out, okay, what is this really going to look like specifically for my team?
Yeah, I just want to say my takeaways, a couple of things that you've all said in different ways. We have to continue to stay resilient and curious and open to what's needed now, because it is true. For everybody out there listening and for us all in this room, it is only going to continue to be a rodeo of what's happening now and how do we manage this now. So we really do have to be in a curious, open, like that's what I'm taking away, is that we have to continue. In one of my last panels, one of the panelists said, we just have to keep figuring it out just like we have all year, because it's not going to get normal. It's just going to keep changing. And so we have to have resilience around that. And I think the other things that I want to underline, you said in so many different ways, is that it is about relationship and how we are together, and focusing on that more, I think, and being aware of it. And I'm hearing almost putting on the hat of a facilitator, that we as leaders have to keep facilitating that. We have to keep bringing the relationship back into it and being hyper vigilant in the different environments, right? Hybrid, how it's showing up. Are we in a room together? Are we not? Are we all? Are we half? And how do we do that?
I think on that point, Marla, too, I think you brought up, and I won't pretend that we do a good job of it, but the team check-ins are so important, right? I mean, the temptation, and we all said we're over-programmed right now. And so the temptation is just to have our blinders on, get work done. But I think setting some routine cadence of check-ins and how are we doing? How are we showing up? How is our performance? And really allocating that time. And we do it on a one-on-one basis, right? We are all programmed as organizations, but I will acknowledge, like, we don't do it enough on a team basis.
You need to do it as a team.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And not only that, you need to be allocating more time and not come into the office and do team effectiveness and then go back on hybrid. You got to do it in the hybrid environment, because that's where the hiccups can be. So, I mean, we could go on, and I want to be mindful of time. So before I say anything else, we now have an ebook. Level Up EQ has an ebook on teams and how are your teams doing. So if you're, come subscribe, get the ebook, levelupeq.com. We're happy to share it with you, and it has a team assessment in it, and it will help you start to get a handle on where are you with your team. And also, we're going to be doing a psychological safety and teaming event on July 21st at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So if you want to keep in this conversation, we're going to be doing more on it. And so thank you, audience, for joining us. Thank you, panelists. Your gold, the information you gave the audience, and this will be recorded so other people can hear what you said, because it was all so helpful and important, and open and vulnerable. So thank you for your service and your sharing, and thank you all for being here. And go out and create magic with those you lead.